Hey, deserving listeners, Jorge and Anfisa. Let's see what happened.
It made a lot of damage and it's gonna take me some time to heal. I feel like I've been having a hard time getting through to George. It's still the same. He is not trying to work on our relationship. He just says that he does, but I don't see any actions. Today I want to talk about things that hurt me, things that I have inside of me that I couldn't share when George was sitting next to me at our counseling session.
How you doing? Have a seat.
Okay, so we're seeing that Anfisa is showing up to the couple therapist by herself. Some people will say this is unethical. It is not an ethical violation for him to agree to see her individually. There are a number of different frames in which this would work. You might meet alone with her for a session, alone with him for a session, and then together for a few sessions, and then alone with each of them again. You know, I actually do that a lot, especially with couples that are having a lot of conflict. You can get a lot further with people that way because in individual sessions, they might feel safer to talk about things, and then you can talk with them about, okay, well, how about we bring this up with your partner in this way? Whereas if you only see them as a couple, there's a chance that one or both of the individuals won't even tell you something that's happening, not something nefarious and horrible, but, you know, people come from relational traumas such that they get kind of mixed up when they're in the presence of their partner, not in an abusive way, but in a way that is hard for them to hold on to their differentiation, hold on to who they are. And they're just freer in individual meetings like this. So there's that frame. Also, some therapists will allow one person to come in occasionally. So you see the couple, then you see one person every now and then. I don't usually recommend that for a variety of reasons. You can also switch the treatment plan if everyone agrees. If Anfisa and George had agreed that they would terminate the couple file, so the client file would be closed, and that after that point, she would hire the same couple therapist for her individual therapy. If they both consented to that, then that would also be generally okay. There are some caveats to that. But there are some therapists that will play pretty loose with who shows up and who they talk to. And a risk, if you play loose with that boundary, is that you can alienate the person who's not there. You know, I don't know, but there's a very off chance that Anfisa said, okay, well, we had our couple session, but, you know, I have some things I want to tell you, and I don't want him here for that. So, you know, let me make an appointment with you. Well, if someone said that to me, I wouldn't accept that, because I would say, if you want individual therapy, absolutely, you can find a therapist, but I don't want to create a triangulation situation where you come in and your partner feels betrayed, like we were talking behind their back. So, you know, there's various different measures that I put in place early on in the relationship to head those possibilities off at the pass, if you will. So I don't know how they got to this situation, but I just thought I'd lay out kind of the lay of the land.
How you been?
Yeah, I've been good.
What should we chat about? What's going on?
I don't even know where to start, but I feel like me and George have a lot of problems.
Has there been any lying going on since we had last met?
Yes. I found out that he went to lawyers with his sister to discuss the divorce.
You feel it was a betrayal. Yeah, he's just not honest with you.
In couple therapy, it is rife with countertransference, meaning we as therapists will have tremendous reactivity, sometimes noticed by us, sometimes not, sometimes innocuous, sometimes not. It wouldn't be, especially with a couple like this, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, just imagine for yourself when you watch them on this show, the emotions and judgments and anger and criticisms, you know, and you might even yell at the screen sometimes. It's like, George, you jerk, or Anfisa, you. Yeah. Therapists are humans. They have all those reactions as well, especially when you're in the room with them for an hour and you're trying to help them and you're actually developing a relationship with them as individuals and as a couple. And so there's a lot of opportunity for our humanness to emerge. And we want our humanness to emerge to some extent. We want to be authentic. We don't want to be robots and cut off from them. So it wouldn't be unusual. In fact, you know, you put the two of them in a room with 10 different therapists and you're going to get a wide variety of reactions, but you're probably going to get a lot of reactions. And often that will manifest in bias against one person or the other. It requires us as therapists to be extremely aware of ourselves, to have our own supervision, our own therapy, our own self-exploration, our own practices. And even then, we're still going to be triggered and lose perspective in the middle of a session.
Has there been any lying going on since we had last met?
Yes. I found out that he went to lawyers with his sister to discuss the divorce.
You feel it was a betrayal? Yeah, he's just...
Now, there's another possibility is that the therapist assessed for, because we didn't see the whole session, and has detected that Anfisa has tremendous relational traumas. And one of the techniques or approaches that can help with individuals like this is you want to be very explicitly validating, particularly in the beginning. Well, let's say Anfisa comes into me and I have seen the show. Let's say that happens. And so I have an idea. And let's say that what we've seen on the show is real and representative of at least a portion of the relationship. So there's a lot of assumptions there. But she comes in to see me and she starts to complain about George, right? She's like, George this, George that. Now, in my mind, I'm like, well, there's another side of the story. And I think Anfisa needs to learn how to recognize her distortions, or at least have a question mark around that. And all that is true. But with people with tremendous relational traumas and have a very easy time getting triggered, especially when they're being vulnerable in therapy, I might forego all of that information and confrontation and countering what she is saying or helping her in those ways by absolutely validating what she's saying. So let's say that she comes to me and she has a session. She's like, yeah, so the other day I thought he was lying. I don't know he was. So I went into his phone and I was upset, and so I demanded that I go with him to meet a friend. He was going to see a friend by himself, and that's just not possible. That's not okay with me, and so I made him bring me along. And then on the way home, he was a little standoffish. You know, he treats me like crap all the time. So normally, I might say something like, wait, so you're telling me that because you felt insecure when he was going to meet up with a friend, you forced yourself into that situation. Are you telling me he's not allowed to see his friend by himself? If I said something, even if I was very tentative and had a Socratic way of getting to that point, a very question-oriented way of getting to that point, she might be extremely triggered and walk out of the room and never come back because of the amount of betrayal that she will feel because of the way that she sees the world as a result of her relational trauma. So I might say something like, wow, so when you found out that he was going to meet up with his friend, that felt really betraying to you. That felt really hurtful. You felt like he was talking about you behind your back, like he's secretly working against you. That's what it felt like to you. And she's like, yeah, that's what it felt like to me. And she starts to cry. And I would say, yeah, that really hurts. Even though in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm imagining it's based on a total distortion and on kind of an abusive notion that she is entitled to force herself into his life that way and not let him meet up with a friend by himself. Because I'm playing the long game, that I need to establish early that I am validating and that I'm here. I'm not lying. I'm not saying that he deserved it. The way that I phrased it, I'm like, wow, you felt this way. I'm not saying it makes sense you feel that way. I'm saying, wow, you felt that way, or that made you feel this way, or something like that. And so once they feel safe enough with me and they feel fulfilled in the relationship enough, which could take a long time, then I will start to test the waters. I'll start to introduce some of these other ideas. Maybe it's a little challenging here and there, raising a question mark in certain situations, and I will test the waters. It'll just be a little bit. And if she can tolerate it, then I'll say, okay, she can tolerate that, then we can go a little further. And I'm always trying to see where that tolerance zone is. But in the beginning of therapy, I don't want to take a chance like that, because I used to do that in the beginning of my career. I would have a client and I would take a chance early on in the treatment and they would blow out of therapy. I'd never see them again. And I wondered if they might not ever go back to therapy because they were taking a chance just with therapy in general. And so what if they never go back? I'm not doing them any good by doing that, right? Now, if I believe that he is being abused, I will do everything I can to advocate for him getting a therapist so that he can have someone in his corner for obvious reasons. But there's a possibility that the therapist is doing that. I don't see any direct sign of that, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Not honest with you. Which makes you feel all the more afraid that he doesn't really love you and he wants to fight for you.
It feels good to talk to somebody about what George does. It is hard for me to open up because I feel like I don't have anybody close enough to share things like that.
Interesting. I suspected that to be true, but she's confirming it that she doesn't have anyone in her life. She doesn't have family in her corner. She doesn't have friends in her corner. I think for reasons that we can imagine. And the therapist is doing a great job at making her feel safe and heard and creating a space where she can talk about whatever she wants to talk about, which is, fantastic. And I'm just glad that she went to a second session. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. We often talk about a work-life balance, right? But how often do we talk about a balance between time for others and time for ourselves? It's so easy to get caught up in thinking about what everyone else wants from us and never taking the time for ourselves. And of course, therapy can help you with that balance. I mean, just going to therapy is taking time for yourself, right? I've had many clients who will do this. They will come into my office, sit down on my couch, and let out a big sigh of relief because I think for the first time in a week, they're actually taking time to think about what they need. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's worth giving a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and suited to your schedule. And also, you can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge. So, find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
I don't know much about your family of origin or his. I'm guessing they're fairly different.
Well, I grew up with my grandmother. My dad died when I was 9. He was hit by a car. My mom, she was always looking for a new husband or something, so we're not really close.
Interesting. I'm glad the therapist asked that question. I'm glad they included that. So we're hearing that raised by grandmother. I think we knew that or someone told me. Father was killed when she was young and mother was always looking for another husband. I'm guessing that it's more than that. There's more specifics there because if you just hear that, you're like, well, okay, sounds like you had a loving grandmother and a loving parents. You had loving dad, loving mom, and then tragically your dad died and then your mom was grieving and was looking for a husband. It sounds like at least until she was 9, until her dad died, everything was fine. I'm going to take a guess and say that's not true. I'm going to take a guess and say that because she was raised by her grandmother, something pretty serious was happening with her parents such that it interfered with their ability to take care of her. I don't know. I'm just making up stuff. But given the way that she presents, I wouldn't be surprised that throughout her early childhood and maybe beyond, there was tremendous difficulty. Now, can someone have relational traumas of betrayal and abandonment when one of their parents dies? Yeah, they can. Even if it's on, an accident that happened. She said that he was hit by someone. When you're young, you're so narcissistically oriented, not in a pathological way, in a developmentally normal way, and you have a pretty simplistic way of seeing the world, that there's a part of you that will feel as though the person has abandoned you. Even though you intellectually know, well, it's not my dad's fault that he was killed, but it can feel kind of like an abandonment. Well, it's even common for spouses to feel this way. So, you have two 35-year-olds and the husband dies from cancer. There's a treatment process and then he dies. The spouse later on will sometimes, not all the time, have this feeling of sometimes I know it's not right. They'll say this. They'll say, sometimes, I know this is totally irrational, but sometimes I get really angry at him for getting cancer and dying. I know that's not rational. It doesn't make any sense, but, he left me with the kids and the bills and with my grief. And, he's somewhere else, I don't know, the afterworld or gone forever or something. And I'm left here trying to pick up the pieces. And sometimes I get really angry at him for that. I know that's not right, but that's the kind of how I feel. So if you can feel that way as an adult, you can absolutely feel that way when you're a kid, right? Because you personalize everything. I wasn't good enough, that my father didn't take better care of himself, or that he wasn't more careful when he was driving around, or whatever. And that can feel like an abandonment. It can feel like your father, even though he was accidentally killed, it can feel like he left you, and that if you were a better person, he would still be alive. Sometimes that can happen. But given the way that she presents, I would, I've never heard a story where someone has everything's fine until age 9. They have a relational trauma like that, and then they have the presentation that she said. I've never heard that before. Maybe we'll get some more details here. And we don't have to, and maybe I'm wrong, but and I'm guessing we're not going to get more details because we don't usually.
So your grandmother brought you up, basically. Yeah. Seems to be some definite sadness and trauma. We learn things from our childhood. It kind of makes us who we are.
I feel like grandma is very protective of me, and I don't open up to her because I don't want her to worry about me. And it's really hard because George is the only person I have here, but I just can't trust him.
Okay, so we're learning that she doesn't want to burden her grandmother with her own troubles. And I don't know, but it wouldn't be uncommon for the history to look something like this, where she's born into a family that has troubles. Her biological parents have conflict and maybe alcoholism, other mental health issues, mom's depressed or something. And very early on in Anfisa's life, the parents have a run-in with the authorities or something. And the grandmother either comes in and says, look, you guys are let me take this child off your hands. Or the parents are like, we can't take care of this child. Can you just get your mom to take care of Anfisa for a month or something? Because we're fighting all the time, or we're using substances all the time, or our mental health isn't working, or a combination of all of them. And then Anfisa goes to grandmother temporarily, but it becomes apparent over time that it's going to be permanent. And grandmother is a saint because she's taking care of this needy child, but grandmother isn't super invested in the relationship the way that you would hope a primary caregiver would be, because grandmother has been through it. Also might feel a little resentful that in her retirement years, she's having to take care of her irresponsible daughter's child, that kind of thing, or son's child, whatever. Grandmother might also be dealing with her own stuff. And so there might be, her needs are being met, Anfisa's being fed and sheltered in this thing, but the amount of attention that Anfisa needs and affection and holding and love and, eye contact and play with each other it's not enough. And Anfisa grows up learning that, I want my grandmother, but I also know that I'm kind of a burden on her. And some grandmothers in a situation like this, when they're upset, might even say to a young child, it's like, look, I didn't even want you, that kind of language. We're not hearing that, of course, but, there can be a lot of stuff there potentially. And so, I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there as a scenario, because the way that she's painting it, it's like this pretty minor thing, and I'm guessing she doesn't want to out her parents. She doesn't have any reason to do that. So that would be my guess. Now, of course, she probably bonded with her parents very early in life. She might not even remember that. And when she was transitioned from her parents to the grandmother at some point, that might have been a tremendous attachment loss, even though it was best for Anfisa. But as a child, you can't really sift through that. You can't be like, yeah, it's better I go with this other person. These people are too chaotic. No, children are just like, no, those are the people. Even if they're absolutely abusive and absolutely chaotic, infants, when they latch on to their caregivers, they're latched. It's a biological thing. It's not a decision or a logical choice that children will make.
Just given that, everything seems pretty scary to you. Only child and coming over here, and then now you're finding things you can't trust about him, which is all the more scary.
Yeah, great. This is fantastic. So the therapist is connecting very quickly early childhood betrayals with betrayals happening right now, because when you connect those things, you can have insight into perhaps what the true pain is and what your triggering is, and a direction forward for healing, such that, you'll feel betrayed by your partner when they lie, but maybe not overreact with anger and abuse. Now, I will say, in this season, we haven't seen any evidence that Anfisa has been abusive to him, and we haven't heard any reports. Doesn't mean it's not happening, but there's a chance that she has actually turned a new leaf and is learning how to manage her emotions better, such that she isn't hurtful to him. I'm also getting the impression that the two of them are in a more, now that they're back together, are in a more distant arrangement, because they're not fighting really much at all. And it makes me think that they are trying to preserve the relationship by being very subdued, and that helps to reduce the conflict, but it also means that there isn't a lot of affection between the two of them. I don't know. It just kind of has that sense to me, which would potentially mean that there isn't the high volatility emotions and conflict such that she would become abusive. And maybe it's best that they have that style right now. And what I'll say is that when I'm working with couples with high conflict, I consider there to be two phases of therapy, where in the beginning, we're trying to reduce the conflict. And then the second phase, and there's a lot of overlap, of course, but the second phase is increasing affection and togetherness and self-actualization and connection with who you are and what you need, and understanding each other deeper. In the beginning, if we have a lot of conflict, it's hard to work on affection. We can do it at the same time for sure, but the conflict is so erosive, so destructive to their love, to their life, particularly if it has abusive elements, that we really have to prioritize that and bring that down. And then with the lack of conflict, we can begin to actually build affection, sometimes for the very first time in their life. It's not like they had a lot of affection, they entered a conflict period, and now we're getting back the affection. They might have, due to their own relational traumas, never had a period of time where they had tremendous affection and understanding each other. So sometimes that's a brand new thing to them that they didn't even know was possible. All right, well, that is it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.